We find that eating within an eating window, not having excessive amounts of carbohydrate, having sufficient protein, bringing in fiber there as well to help to manage that glycemic response, and having protein and those healthy fats can have a really, really positive influence on somebody's weight management journey. As we age as well, we lose lean mass, so the lean mass in our muscles, and we need sufficient protein to be able to maintain our lean mass. And also, people don't think about it so much, but we also need protein for our bones as well. Protein, it forms the building blocks of what we need for our bones. So it's very important. Once people take GLP-1s, the level of food noise significantly reduces. And what food noise means is basically, it's kind of a constant chatter and constant thought about food or eating. But I've heard patients say to me, oh, is this what normal people feel like? Because it really is, and it's such a significant reduction. They just said that voice isn't there anymore. So not only does it give them the weight loss that they've been trying so hard to lose all this time, the quality of life is better. Oh, I'm not thinking about food all the time. I can live my life.
Today, we're digging into why weight management gets harder after 40 and what actually helps. We'll talk about insulin resistance, protein, time-restricted eating, GLP-1 medications, and supplements that matter to our overall health. Hi, welcome to Beyond the Paper Gown. I'm your host, Dr. Mitzi Crockover. And if you are like me, you may have a lot of questions about nutrition and weight and all the changes that your body is going through. And we have an incredible expert today who is a nutritionist. And it's not often that we get to have an hour with a nutritionist, so I'm very excited about that. Our guest is Huntriss. She is an award-winning registered dietitian, and she is the Chief Nutrition Officer at Simple App, which is an AI weight loss coach. And she has a master's degree in advanced nutrition and a master's in research in clinical research. And she's worked extensively across clinical practice, industry, and health tech. You're coming from London, I'm coming from Arizona. I
am. So we're at different times of the day. But yeah, really, really happy to be here. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. So let's just get started because I've got lots of questions for you. I'll start out with, the fact that you work with women across all stages. But as you and I were just speaking, my focus is primarily women over 40. What do you see as the nutritional challenges that women of that age, and again, I know that's even a longer lifespan in terms of 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, but how is that different than the women of younger years?
I would say for women over the age of 40, what does become a concern, or should I say something that people tend to find a little bit more difficult, is weight management. And we see this, more so when people are approaching perimenopause and menopause, and it just kind of feels a little bit different, whereas weight management felt a little bit easier because of the way in which the body changes. We're posed with a few more challenges. So that's certainly one key thing that people are wanting to focus on. But then as well, as we age, we start to encounter sadly, more health issues. As we age, we're at increased risk of cardiometabolic disease, so type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, etc. And it can really span further than that. Even people wanting to pay attention to their cognitive health and their cognitive function, wanting to retain their physical health and physical function. So yeah, people do, I think when people are younger, when there are less issues that are evident, the mindset in terms of like how and why people eat just is a little bit different.
Absolutely. And I was, when you were saying that, it was kind of in what goes in, you could basically figure out how many calories you needed to manipulate. And then if you restricted yourself, you could probably see the weight loss, right? With a little exercise as well. And it's not so easy anymore. You're exactly right. And then you have to, again, like you said, not only factor in some of the issues that you said, which so well, like diabetes and heart disease, and knowing what to eat and be more cognizant of that, but then also wanting to focus on improving aspects like cognitive health and even bone health, right? So take us through how you go through an evaluation of potentially a client, and what are some of the things that you recommend or are looking for?
Yeah, so I think if somebody comes in and they're coming in for an assessment, a really good place to start is actually having had tests done. Because we know certain things that we know, but there's a lot that's going on within our body that we don't know about, and we should be paying attention to those things as well as the things that we're aware of. So even just with things like HbA1c, so that's kind of the amount of glucose that's in our blood that's indicative of, say, type 2 diabetes, or looking at blood pressure, looking at cholesterol levels, for example. So it's like when we've got a good understanding as to what's going on the inside, that's when we can make a plan in terms of, what we want to do going forward. There may be things that people are aware of in terms of, say if they know that they have osteoporosis, or they know that they want to lose some weight, or they've got musculoskeletal pain, so they've got knee pain or hip pain. So really it's a combination. It's led from what we know of their kind of what's going on in the background and medical history, but also the things that people present with, and it's really, really personalized. You could have two women 47 years old come in, and what we discuss could be completely different.
Of course. And I would also assume that everybody has different goals, right? It
Absolutely.
may be, those two women may look the same, but why they're coming to you may be very different.
Exactly. And, some people, weight can be a focus for some people, but actually health can be more of a focus than weight for others. And,
Yes.
we know that, people can have a slightly higher BMI, but their health can be in good shape. So, and, it's the beauty of it really, and like the being able to personalize care and really kind of like homing in on what is most important to that person to ensure that ultimately they're happy and they're healthy.
Absolutely. Let's go back a little bit, because we talked a little bit about that there are changes when we get older. Talk a little bit more about the science behind what is happening. Why can't I get rid of my belly fat?
Yeah, and I think it's such an important conversation to have. And basically, when we reach perimenopause and then through menopause, we see hormonal changes. And one of the biggest and most important changes is the reduction in levels of estrogen. And it has so many effects. And one of the key effects that it has is it changes basically where we store our fat. And it encourages more fat storage around the middle, so kind of abdominal fat. And this has many implications, and one of which is higher levels of insulin resistance. And when we have higher levels of insulin resistance, sadly, weight management becomes much more tricky. And one of the ways in which it becomes tricky is because it affects our carbohydrate metabolism. So how we can actually like metabolize and deal with the carbohydrates that are being consumed is more challenging. So that's one thing. And generally speaking, in terms of Western diets, our carbohydrate consumption is quite high. But then there are other consequences of that as well. So if we have more weight around the middle, this means that our risk of cardiometabolic diseases, as we mentioned before, such as type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, increases. So we have to be aware of that and try to manage things as much as possible. And managing weight can help to reduce the risk of those things. But also, in terms of that reduction in estrogen, we can also see a reduction in bone mineral density. So once we move past the menopause, our calcium requirements increase because we are at this higher risk. Another thing that people aren't so aware of is that estrogen plays a role in the maintenance of muscle mass. So when our estrogen levels are lower, we can experience greater lean mass losses, and that itself has implications. And we've just spoken about some of the physical things there, but these physical things that we experience, they also have an influence on how we feel mentally and emotionally as well. So yeah, there's some big considerations.
You know, that insulin resistance is also what increases our risk of diabetes. And so then that diabetes increases our risk of heart disease. So it's kind of all these vicious cycles, if you will, happening at all at once. But as I said, I'm hoping that you're going to tell us how we can mitigate some of that through nutrition.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if we look at the insulin resistant state and we look at weight management that's a little bit more challenging, it's just actually thinking about the strategies, and there are ways in which this can be made much simpler. As I mentioned, really the nutrient that becomes a little bit more problematic to manage is carbohydrates. So what we find really successfully is that when women have a higher protein intake and have a slightly lower carbohydrate intake, this can really, really help to improve insulin sensitivity and reduce that insulin resistance. And this makes weight management so much easier. So in essence, we want to avoid large intakes of carbohydrate. And also as well, we want to avoid kind of high intakes of sugars and added sugars. A higher protein intake, but then also focusing on a lower glycemic index and a lower glycemic load. And what that means is, so a meal, for example, will have a glycemic load, and this is the influence that it has on blood glucose, so glucose being the sugar that's in our blood. Now, when we pair a carbohydrate with protein or with healthy fats or both, this lowers the glycemic index, which basically means it's a much gentler impact on blood glucose. And also, this is much easier for insulin to deal with. So when we're insulin resistant, we also want to look at that kind of glycemic responsive foods, choosing those that aren't going to create this glucose spike, because then it actually makes weight management much easier. And another thing that we see at the Simple app where I work, we support a variety of intermittent fasting that's called time restricted eating. And this, as a dietary intervention, has also been shown to improve insulin resistance. We find that eating within an eating window, not having excessive amounts of carbohydrate, having sufficient protein, bringing in fiber there as well to help to manage that glycemic response, and having protein and those healthy fats can have a really, really positive influence on somebody's weight management journey.
Wow. You know, what you were talking about is so profound. And is it the paleo diet that is high protein? I should know this. But a lot of people subscribe to that. Is that something that you would suggest, or is that something to get started with? You know, again, there's been so many different, I don't want to call them fads, but certainly trends in terms of dieting. Yeah,
absolutely. And the thing is, if people find that a particular dietary intervention works for them, it is something that they can look to. And paleo kind of, it's very kind of like natural ingredients. It doesn't have, high levels of ultra processed foods, for example. So there's absolutely things in there that can work for people. So by all means, if that's a starting point, but we don't necessarily prescribe a specific diet as such. For me personally, I would say the Mediterranean diet is actually a really, really good place to start. For anyone really, because it's high in antioxidants, it's anti-inflammatory, and it's just got such a wide range of nutrients that really it can support people in all aspects of life, and really kind of like, you know, most aspects of health as well.
For those who probably have heard, I mean, I don't know anybody who hasn't heard of the Mediterranean diet, but I'm not sure everybody really knows exactly what it is. So tell us a little bit about how you define a Mediterranean diet.
Sure thing. So basically, the Mediterranean diet is plenty of fruits and vegetables of varying colours, so that we've got a variety of nutrients, a variety of different antioxidants. And then we've also got whole grains. So whole grains are also antioxidant, and I suppose you could say that this is the differentiation, or a key differentiation, between paleo and Mediterranean, in terms of paleo tends to, well, paleo diets avoid grains, whereas in the Mediterranean diet this still has a place. There's a focus on healthy fats, so olive oil, and also omega-3. So omega-3 from oily fish. It's a potent anti-inflammatory agent, which is a great part of the diet. Nuts and seeds, legumes, and then it's lower in red meat and added sugar. So it's just basically, it's a really nice foundation. And another thing in terms of the paleo diet as well is they don't have legumes. So they don't really have legumes, they don't really have the grains. And I would say really, you know, whole grains are associated with good health, as are legumes. So that would be why when I go to advise a dietary pattern, that would be what I would go for over the paleo. But it's not to say that a paleo doesn't have benefits.
Sure. And then going back to what you were talking about, I think a lot of people are confused about how much protein they should be getting.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. You know, like protein is such a buzzword, but it is really important. So we've got 3 main macronutrients: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And protein is so useful when it comes to weight management. It just gives real sense of satiety. So it's very important for that. And then, you know, it helps to also manage and regulate blood glucose levels, as we mentioned before, when paired with carbohydrates. But another important thing when considering menopause and as we age as well, is we lose lean mass. So the lean mass in our muscles, and we need sufficient protein to be able to maintain our lean mass. And also, people don't think about it so much, but we also need protein for our bones as well. You know, protein, you know, it forms the building blocks of what we need for our bones. So it's very important. And generally speaking, in terms of recommended amount of protein for the general population, for public health guidelines, it is technically the same, but experts do agree that actually when we reach menopause, to have a little bit more protein can certainly help. And for people that may want to do their sums, the recommended protein intake just for public health for adults is 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So say somebody is 100 kilos, that would mean that their kind of like protein requirements are, say, 80 grams, just if we're kind of like looking in simple terms. And then what is recommended really in terms of menopause is that we have 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. However, when it comes to weight management, some suggest actually that protein intake could be even higher. But what is important, because obviously when we're adding protein in, protein is still calories, so something has to give. And this is when, you know, the really useful strategy is, if you're increasing your protein, you generally want to reduce your carbohydrates a little bit as well.
How do you counsel your vegetarians?
Yeah, and you know what? I was also vegetarian and now am pescatarian. And it can be challenging. And, you know, I'll be honest in that when I look at my diet previously, one of the issues were I feel there were days where I was not getting enough protein. So, you know, it's thinking about where can you get them? And for people that consume dairy and eggs, then we've got more opportunities. So dairy, if you don't consume cow's milk, then say like soya milk, for example, can also contain protein. But things like eggs, we've obviously got cheese, but then we come to like beans and lentils. And legumes are a good protein source. But then there's also things like tofu and tempeh, and there are meat substitutes, and they can kind of be under different brands. So when you go and look at the label and actually see what's in there, these can be a really good way for plant-based eaters to get in their protein. And I think it's really important that we don't get scared away by the concept of ultra-processed foods or UPFs just because it's a UPF. We really need to look at what's it giving us nutritionally, because we could be kind of like doing ourselves a disservice cutting out something just because it's a UPF when it can give us a nutritional benefit.
Sure, it's all about weighing your options, right? You also talked a lot about carbs, which, you know, makes me so sad because that's my favorite food. And you talked about the glycemic index. We're having everything monitored, and one of those monitors is a continual glucose meter, not only for people with diabetes, but maybe someone who just wants to follow that. How do you use that information?
Yeah, so continuous glucose monitors is something, it's generally a patch that somebody may put on their arm, and then it measures the levels of glucose in the blood continuously. And this goes up and down throughout the day, as it should. And it's influenced by different things. So it's influenced by the food that we consume. It's also influenced by activity. It can be influenced by stress. It can be influenced by alcohol. So there's lots of different things going on there. But yes, what people see is it's carbohydrate containing foods that will create the rise in blood glucose, because carbohydrates break down into sugar, which in this context is glucose. So what people see is when they have larger portions of carbohydrates, they will see bigger spikes. But when you combine foods, you will see kind of gentler spikes. So like what I was saying before, if you've got some, let's just say white rice, for example, if you have a big portion of white rice, you will see a big kind of surge in your blood glucose. If you reduce that portion of rice, the surge will be lower. If you add protein to it, the peak will be flatter. It won't peak so much. And then also if you add some healthy fats, so say a little bit of olive oil, that again will just flatten the curve slightly. And also another thing that plays a role here is fiber. So including things like, having plenty of vegetables in there, then it just has a different effect on the blood glucose. Now, I would say that people are kind of split when it comes to CGMs, because these were designed initially for people with diabetes.
Right.
And people with diabetes have high levels of blood glucose where it's a problem, or where it's something that we want to manage to try and get to normal levels. Whereas somebody who doesn't have diabetes, our bodies are designed to, the insulin that we have is designed to manage these rises in glucose. It's just a normal part of our metabolism and physiology. But having spoken to many people who have used CGMs, what they do say, we can eat quite mindlessly sometimes. So sometimes seeing data can be really useful to inform food choices.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And, why is insulin resistance so bad? What is insulin resistance?
So insulin basically is a hormone that helps us to control the level of sugar or glucose in our blood. So what generally happens is when we eat a carbohydrate containing food, we see an increase in blood glucose. The job of insulin is to basically take that glucose from the blood and then into the cells, and that's where we can use it as energy. In people who are insulin resistant, what it just means is the insulin doesn't quite work as well as what it's supposed to. So what it means is that insulin resistance can mean that people have slightly higher levels of glucose in the blood. Insulin resistance is also associated with inflammation. It's associated with like cardiometabolic conditions. So really, and you know, like our metabolism is just this big system, and there are so many different moving parts. But you know, things that we can do is try to maintain a healthy weight, or even just losing 5 to 10% of somebody's body weight can have a really positive influence on their overall metabolic health.
Talk to us a little bit about intermittent fasting.
With intermittent fasting, it is basically alternating between periods of eating and periods of fasting, and this can be done in many different ways. One example of intermittent fasting is time-restricted eating, and a common protocol that you may hear is the 16-8. So this means that people fast for 16 hours and then consume their calories within an 8-hour window. But this can be really flexible. Some people actually prefer to have a shorter fasting window and a longer eating window. So some people may even do a 12-12 protocol, where they consume their calories within 12 hours and then they fast for the rest. So this can be really flexible as per people's needs. Then there's other varieties, such as, have you heard of the 5-2 diet before? So the 5-2 diet is where on 2 days of the week, people restrict their calories to quite a low intake, so around about 500 to 600 calories, but then eat normally on the other 5 days of the week. And this can work quite well for some people because they like just having the focus on 2 days and being able to be a little bit more relaxed on the other two. And then another one that people may have heard of is ADF, or alternate daily fasting. And this is where every other day somebody may restrict their calorie intake. But for us at the Simple app, we feel that time-restricted eating is the most flexible, the gentlest approach, one that's quite easy to adapt to your lifestyle. And what we do hear from, you know, the millions of people that we work with is intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating is something that you can really easily work into your lifestyle. And this can be the issue with diets, in that if something is, you know, a diet, it's short term, it's not sustainable, that's when you're not going to get your results. But something that you are able to create a lifestyle from, this is when you're going to see the lasting results.
And what is the advantage of intermittent fasting?
So the key advantage is weight management. So first of all, weight loss. So if you think about, if we take 4 hours, for example, of an eating opportunity away, generally people are going to eat less. And this is exactly what we see, and we see it in studies, that people who follow intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating, they simply eat fewer calories. So this means that this then contributes to weight loss. And also, in terms of weight maintenance, keeping your eating window where it is, again, means that you're going to be consuming fewer calories if you were eating generally over a longer period of time. So this can help people in weight maintenance. Also, we see cardiometabolic benefits. So we can see improvements in HbA1c, so that measure of blood glucose. We can see improvements in cholesterol levels, improvements in blood pressure. So really there are, several benefits that can come as a result of the intermittent fasting and the weight loss that we see.
Sure. And so transitioning to a topic that I think a lot of people are interested in and hearing about are the GLP-1s. And that obviously they caught on very quickly because of the weight. Well, first of all, they were for diabetes.
Yeah.
And then there was obviously weight loss was noticed. And then that has become something that has been very desirable for a lot of people. But then in the meantime, we've seen a number of other potential benefits of it. So talk to us a little bit about what are GLP-1s, what are their effects, both good and potentially bad, and how should people consider if they're appropriate for them.
So GLP-1s are basically what are now a weight loss medication. And as you said before, they were a medication to help to manage high levels of blood glucose. But what we did see was a side effect, if you like, a very favourable side effect of weight loss. And they work in a number of different ways. So they can actually help to increase the amount of insulin that is produced slightly, which can help people with insulin resistance. But one of the key ways in which it helps is it really slows down the digestion of food. And in doing this, it really helps to manage satiety and reduce hunger levels. And a key and really interesting thing that's come out of this is the concept of food noise. Have you come across the concept of food noise?
No, that's a new one for me.
Okay, so basically, when people, it's a discussion that's come out of GLP-1s, but what has been found is that once people take GLP-1s, the level of food noise significantly reduces. And what food noise means is basically, it's kind of a constant chatter and constant thought about food or eating. And in some people, it is incredibly prevalent. And, we're talking about this voice for some people is there all day. For some people, we could, they could be talking like you and I are talking now, and then the back of their mind, they would be thinking, I'm hungry, what am I going to eat? But I've heard patients say to me, oh, is this what normal people feel like?
Wow, that's profound.
It really is, and it's such a significant reduction. They just said that voice isn't there anymore. And, so not only does it give them the weight loss that they've been trying so hard to lose all this time, the quality of life is better. Oh, I'm not thinking about food all the time. I can live my life. So I am an advocate for these medications in the right person.
With respect to that, how do you use them, or how are they used in terms of length of use, if you will, and what other kinds of things need to go along with that in terms of lifestyle?
Great question. And the research and in practice as well has shown that generally when people come off these medications, the weight rebounds. Which is then tricky because, we're still new into the game. I mean, diabetes GLP-1s have been around for a long time, but in terms of for weight loss, it's got a much shorter history. So what does this mean? Does this mean that people may actually have to continue on these medications for life if they want to see these benefits? There are things that you can do. In terms of just even things that we were saying before about having diets higher in protein, higher in fiber, reducing your UPF intake, building in activity into your regime, so improving your diet and lifestyle from where it was before, that will soften the blow in terms of the weight regain. But things that are potentially, could return are elements of the food noise, feeling more hungry. But that's when you have to look at, again, the protein and the fiber. They can actually help with these things. But something that we haven't mentioned also is that, they're certainly not a magic wand. Some people, understandably, don't want to inject themselves with something and have to do that, weekly. Also, common side effects are nausea. People can feel, really quite sick and uncomfortable. And so people have to kind of weigh this up. Do the benefits outweigh the problems that it causes? And again, it's a very, very individual choice.
I've also understood that more and more information coming out about potential effects on inflammation, longevity, brain health, that kind of thing. So what's your take on that one?
Yeah, to be honest, this is something that actually really excites me. To say that I'm obsessed with inflammation sounds very strange,
no, but I get it. Talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Basically, so many health conditions, so many chronic health conditions have this underlying foundation of inflammation. And, I'm interested in it as well because I already spoke about omega-3 and it being potently anti-inflammatory. And I know the role that an anti-inflammatory diet can play in managing a chronic inflammatory disease. I'm really excited about the research that has come out that is showing the anti-inflammatory effects of these medications. And what it may be is that in future, because research is already looking at non-obesity related conditions and how these medications could help. Even in things, say, like rheumatoid arthritis, for example. It's really challenging living with an inflammatory condition. So if a medication like this can bring hope, light, and symptom relief to people, I think that's a very exciting discovery.
Your obsession with inflammation is well-founded. I think we're finding more and more that it's really the basis of so much, including cardiovascular disease, including, autoimmune disease. And I feel an obligation to talk about the fact that women, our inflammatory responses are much higher than men's in a lot of ways, maybe why we tend to be more likely to get some of those autoimmune diseases that you talked about, like rheumatoid arthritis. So for women, this may be even a bigger find. I think a lot of folks are interested in nutrients and supplements. And some folks go get their levels checked and then are taking action based on that. Talk a little bit about when levels matter and what's kind of evidence-based, and then we can talk a bit about maybe some basic supplements that most women should take a look at. There's some elements of our health that we're really aware of, and then there's other elements that we're not. And micronutrient status is an example of an area of our health that we may not be aware of. And it's something, obviously I'm completely biased because I'm a dietitian, but say for example, just take vitamin D. A lot of the population are vitamin D deficient. And vitamin D, it has an influence on so many different aspects of our health. But we don't often know that until we have a blood test. Similarly, with, say, iron, for example, and again, iron deficiency anemia, it's more prevalent in women of childbearing age, but also it can be present across the lifespan. Even things like vitamin B12, so we mentioned plant-based diets before. Vitamin B12 is only found naturally in animal foods. We don't find it naturally in plant foods. You can find it to be fortified, so if it's added, but this is a risk. And then there's implications of that, and this is one that I find really fascinating is vitamin B12 deficiency can be implicated in neurodegenerative conditions, so such as dementia, Alzheimer's, and we can live quite happily with a B12 deficiency and not know, and then we can get to the age of 70 and then we can experience issues off the back of a nutrient deficiency we never knew anything about. This is why I am actually an advocate for, and I understand that it's not accessible. It's not accessible to everybody to go and have these tests.
But I think it can be a really useful thing just to come and get some of the key markers checked where we do see deficiencies, because you may really improve your health and reduce the risk of certain things in the future by understanding and then correcting. And this is the good thing about nutrient deficiencies. They're really easy to fix. We just take a vitamin D supplement, or, we take a vitamin B12 supplement. It may be that you have a vitamin B12 injection, but it's really, really easy to fix.
And all of the ones that you talked about, wearing my, physician hat, are ones that I think that are widely accepted, that those levels do translate into deficiency or adequacy, right? And that we do use those as actionable information. But what about some of the other ones that some people are getting checked for, like zinc and magnesium and some of those others?
Yeah, so magnesium can be that can be a popular one, and I understand that as well, because it does have an influence on how we feel. Also, things like sleep as well, which is obviously very relevant to women as we age. So I would say magnesium it's a viable one, and then again, it's if we have lower levels, it's something that can be fixed, and people do see if they are deficient and then they take a supplement, people can feel better as a result. I don't often recommend zinc tests. There's other nutrients, say like vitamin B6, for example. Deficiency isn't common. So there's many nutrients where deficiencies aren't really common. So I would say, the ones that we discuss, and I totally understand, checking magnesium levels and things like that, but we don't need to go across all of the essential vitamins and minerals. One that can be interesting, we mentioned omega-3, and it depends, because this isn't so accessibly available all the time, but there are tests that can show your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And basically, so when you have higher levels of omega-6 compared to omega-3, it kind of tells us about our inflammatory status. So you'll always have more omega-6 than omega-3. It will be pretty much impossible to have it. But basically, the ratio can tell you kind of like where your inflammatory status is. And I think that can be a really interesting test for somebody with maybe inflammatory health conditions.
Right. So that if that, sometimes just seeing those numbers actually inspires somebody to take action.
It really does. And, even from me personally, I have been vitamin B12 deficient in the past. I mentioned that I was vegetarian. So it was actually, it was one of the reasons why I decided to introduce fish. And I also have I started taking supplements. I was probably taking supplements but not being very good with it, because I thought, I eat cheese and I eat eggs and I'm fine. But I wasn't. Or I was, but I might not have been. And that's an example of getting the information, doing something useful with it, and then hopefully reducing your risk of things in the future.
Sure. You talked about vitamin D, and we mentioned calcium, all which are important for bone health. What are your recommendations in terms of either of those supplements?
Yes, so we need to make sure that we're having sufficient calcium intake for sure, and over the age of 50, calcium requirements increase. So in the US, for women, it's 1,000 milligrams that is recommended of calcium for adults, and then, as I say, that goes up to 1,200 for women over the age of 50. So how people can get this is you can get that from diet. But sometimes, because 1,200 is still, you really need to be on it. You need to be on it to be getting 1,200 milligrams from diet alone. So some people may choose a supplement, and that is absolutely fine to do. And it can make reaching those targets much easier. And then with vitamin D as well. So vitamin D is, the one key nutrient that we cannot get enough of from food. So we generally synthesize vitamin D through sunlight. But there are times and instances where vitamin D supplementation is a requirement, and it's more prevalent for people certainly in northern states as well, kind of like certainly during the winter months.
Sure.
But also if people are indoors and they don't get much exposure to sunlight, or people with darker skin as well. So it's certainly something we should be paying attention to. And a vitamin D supplement is often a good choice in many situations.
When we first started talking about the changes in the estrogen reduction during perimenopause and menopause, obviously estrogen is an option for many women. What, in terms of diet, I think a lot of people may have a question about, if I ate a lot of tofu or soy, will that help boost my estrogen levels with or without estrogen?
And I think it can do. And it's something that, it can be really useful to monitor. So including soy in the diet, because basically they contain phytoestrogens. So phytoestrogens have an estrogen-like structure, and they can bind to estrogen receptors, giving, in this context, it can give, an estrogen-like effect. So the theory is there. Some people absolutely benefit from it. Other people may not notice a difference. So I would say, do something for a reasonable period of time, and get in tune with your symptoms and with the effect of certain things, because people can be take all sorts of supplements. Right, I'm going to add that in, and then we're like, what is working? Is anything working? So I think, when adding something in, whether it's a dietary change or whether it's a supplement, do be aware of your symptoms and whether making those changes have had any benefit for you.
So what are some other sources of phytoestrogens other than soy and soy-based products like tofu?
Yeah, so soy is often the better known one, and soy are sources of isoflavones. So we've obviously got soy, so tofu, tempeh, edamame, but then we've got other things such as lignans, and then you can find these in foods such as flax seeds, also whole grains, and then some nuts and seeds also can contribute to overall phytoestrogen status.
You talked a lot about dairy during our conversation. I think some people are of the mind that dairy is evil. So what is your thought on that, and how should people gauge their dairy intake?
Yeah, so for me personally, my stance is that dairy is a really positive and healthy part of the diet. So, as we've already discussed, there's the protein source, calcium, but it's also got nutrients such as iodine and B vitamins. So it's a really, really nutrient-rich source. Mm-hmm. But people, I think there is a myth around dairy and inflammation, but actually research that has looked at this shows that dairy doesn't, all in all, have an inflammatory response. So I think people don't need to be worried about that. People can have concerns from the ethical point of view around dairy farming. And this, I completely understand it. So if people want to make choices for that reason, everybody is entitled to do so. But what I would say is, if we cut out dairy, we just need to ensure that we're replacing the nutrients lost. And a key one here, dairy is our main dietary source of calcium. So we do need to think about where else we can get that. And there are other fortified plant-based alternatives. So fortified milks, fortified yogurts as well that can contain this. Also, you'll find some tofu can be set in calcium. Fish with bones can have calcium in there, but it's likely that for these individuals that we would need to look to a calcium supplement to get the intake that is required.
Sure. Any concern about the fat content?
So in dairy, the main type of fat is saturated fat. But really, and we don't want to have an excessive amount of saturated fat in the diet. We want to be having more unsaturated fat, which is generally that we get from our plant sources and also fish as well. So that should kind of like be where the balance is. Really, if people are having, you know, a couple of glasses of milk per day, versus having a really, really high diet in red meat, it's not really like ultra processed foods that are high in saturated fat. It's thinking about, you know, as I said, you know, we get plenty of nutrients from milk. So it's kind of weighing things up. But there are lower fat milks. So reduced fat milks then obviously have lower levels of saturated fat, but they still have the same amount of calcium, and then, you know, they contain the other nutrients that we mentioned before.
So it's just about being intentional about what you're doing and making those choices. We've talked a lot about nutrition and diet, but that's not the only piece of a healthy lifestyle. So when you're counseling your patients or clients, what other kinds of things do you discuss with them?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And I'm really glad that we're coming onto this discussion as well, because I feel that, you know, when it comes to health management, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and nutrition is simply one of the pieces. So, you know, other things that we absolutely want to be considering are activity. And even this, you know, we can think about it from two different ways. So there's more cardio, so supporting our cardiovascular system, but then there's also the resistance training as well. And this is really important, not just for our strength, but also to retain our muscle mass. And we know, as we said, as we age, our lean mass decreases. So we have the protein plus the resistance training, and this is what helps to retain our lean mass. So we've got activity, sleep, so important and so
elusive.
I know. It's this, you know, this thing that we all crave, we all want. But it is important that we do acknowledge the benefits of it. I know that, you know, at certain periods of life for women, sleep can be really, really challenging. So it's about doing what you can. It's about doing what you can to optimize your sleep quality and also the length. The length of sleep that you have. And another thing that's, you know, built into this as well is stress management. And I know easier said than done, but it is really important that we do. So, you know, I just feel that like women sometimes just carry like the world, you know, the weight of the world on their shoulders. Yeah. But it's for us to be able to do that and carry the weight of the world. We need to take time and we need to step back. And we need to kind of give back to ourselves, whether it's just taking those 5 minutes, going for a walk, listening to a lovely podcast like this, taking a bath, you know, what you need to do, 5 minutes of meditation to just bring you to a level. And, you know, do this kind of like when you feel that you need to, it can just really, really help. And, you know, even stress and sleep, these also influence what we eat. If we're stressed, we either may not eat, or we may eat on things that aren't going to give us the nutrition that we need. And similarly with sleep, if we haven't had enough sleep, then our food choices are kind of are poorer. So all of these things actually in terms of lifestyle, they all link in together.
So you're the Chief Nutrition Officer for Simple App. So tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Simple App is in essence an AI weight loss coach, and we support people to make healthy diet and lifestyle choices to get to their weight loss goals, but also health goals beyond that. And we focus on intermittent fasting, so time restricted eating, eating within an eating window, good nutrition, gentle movement, and hydration. So just healthy and evidence-based habits to get you to where you need to be. But what we do at the Simple App is utilize the latest technology and AI to basically make this journey as seamless and as simple as possible for our users. You know, I used to practice in clinical practice as a dietitian, one-on-one, working with patients, but with this, you can only serve so many people. And I think a great opportunity with AI is that you are able to serve an infinite amount of people, and so many people need support. So yeah, we're really grateful and we feel very privileged to be able to do this at scale.
And we will put information on that app on how people can access it in our notes. Well, Huntriss, I have taken a lot of your time and a lot of your knowledge, and we really appreciate it. I know I've learned a lot. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
As we heard from our guest, Huntriss, the nutrition needs of women over 40 aren't about restriction. They're about recalibration. Lower estrogen changes how we store fat, how our bodies use carbohydrates, and even how we maintain bone and muscle. But we're not powerless. Increasing protein, adding strength training, focusing on fiber, and building balanced meals can make a real difference. We also learned that time-restricted eating and mindful carbohydrate choices can help improve insulin sensitivity while paying attention to key nutrients like vitamin D, calcium, and B12 supports our long-term health. And whether it's GLP-1 medications or simple lifestyle shifts, the goal is the same: creating sustainable habits that work for your unique body. Midlife is a new phase, not a decline. And understanding the science behind our changing metabolism gives us the tools to thrive. For more information, check out our website at beyondthepapergown.com and sign up for our newsletter. And if you enjoyed today's episode, rate us and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for being with us today, and take good care.